Welcome back to another episode of SmoothBrainEDH, where we make the smoothest plays with the biggest brains. Kamigawa Neon Dynasty is here. All of us were super pumped for this new set and all the cards it brought to the format. So we recorded some games with some of the new commanders. Let's see what everyone brought to the table. Our first player today is Ethan on Hinata, Dawn Crowned. This is a Jeskai artifact combo deck, using Hinata to make powerful draw and control spells cost very little mana. He keeps a hand with Rogran Triome, Spectator Seeding, Prismatic Vista, Jeweled Lotus, Prophetic Prism, Riddlesmith, and Icy Blast. Next up is Shelby on the partner pairing of Yoshimaru, Ever Faithful, and Kodama of the East Tree. This is a green-white Legendary Matters deck, hoping to power up Yoshimaru to a chunky lad and using Kodama to cheat in additional permanents. His starting hand has a Plains, Temple Garden, Eiganjo, Seed of the Empire, Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx, Kodama of the West Tree, Dicella, the Broken Blade, and a Smothering Tithe. The third player is Matt on Isshin, Two Heavens as One. This Marty deck is focused on using Isshin's ability to double up a bunch of powerful effects that trigger on when he or his opponents attack. He keeps a Snow-Covered Swamp, Fabled Passage, Command Tower, City of Brass, Gemstone Caverns, Goldspan Dragon, and Aurelia, the War Leader. And our final player today is Cody on Greasefang, Okiba Boss. This black-white deck is focused on vehicles, using Greasefang to bring powerful, but expensive, vehicles back from the graveyard for the turn to smash opponents' life totals down. He opts to keep an explosive hand of a Swamp, Tainted Field, Phyrexian Tower, Soul Ring, Key to the City, Bomat Bazaar Barge, and Violet Entomber. We're about to hop right into it, but before that, go ahead and leave us a comment on who you hope will take home the victory this game. While you're down there, go ahead and give us a like and subscribe. We post gameplay videos every week and new episodes of our podcast every other week, so subscribe so you don't miss any of our new content. Links to the deck list and social media will be in the description. Now, on to the gameplay.
Shelby wins the die roll, but Matt has a pregame effect. He'll put out Gemstone Caverns and exile his Snow Swamp. Now starting the game, Shelby plays a Plains and casts Yoshimaru. Who would have seen that coming? He then passes the turn to Matt. Matt plays his Fabled Passage and fetches for a mountain, and he'll pass the turn while searching. Cody will play his Swamp and then cast a Soul Ring. After that, he'll tap his Soul Ring for 2 to cast a Felwar Stone, which he peeled off the top. The turn is then passed to Ethan, who plays his Rogran Triome tapped and then passes back to Shelby. Shelby shocks the Temple Garden, then taps for 2 to cast a Rampant Growth. He'll find a tapped forest, swings one at Ethan, and then passes the turn. Matt will play Command Tower, then casts his commander, Isshin. The turn is passed to Cody after that. Cody starts off by casting Key to the City, and then plays his Tainted Field, taps for 3, and casts his commander, Greasefang. He'll then activate Key to the City, discarding his Bomat Bazaar Barge, giving Yoshimaru unblockable till end of turn. He'll then move to combat, and Greasefang will trigger. He returns the Bazaar Barge to the battlefield, drawing a card on its ETB. He'll then crew it with Greasefang, and then swing for 5 at Shelby. The turn is then passed to Ethan, and the Bazaar Bar is bounced on Cody's end step. Ethan will play a Glacial Fortress as land for turn, then tap for 2 and cast Riddlesmith. The turn is passed to Shelby after this. He'll play a Gemstone Caverns as land for turn, which is legendary, so when it enters, Yoshimaru will get a +1/+1 counter. After this, Shelby will tap for 4 mana and cast Smothering Tithe. He'll then move to combat, swing for 2 at Cody, and then pass the turn. Matt doesn't pay the Tithe tax, and then plays the City of Brass as land for turn. He then taps for 3 and casts Sword of Feast and Famine, and then passes the turn to Cody. Cody decides to pay for Smothering Tithe during his draw step. Then on his main phase, we'll play an Exotic Orchard as land for turn. He'll then reactivate Key of the City to give Greasefang unblockable, discarding his Bazaar Barge again. After this, he'll tap for 4 to cast a Vile Entomber. He searches for a little while, but ultimately decides to put Parhelion in his graveyard. He'll then move to combat, returning it to the battlefield with haste thanks to Greasefang. And still before declaring attackers, Cody will crew it with Greasefang. He'll then declare Parhelion at Shelby and the 2 angels at Ethan, so Shelby will take 5 and Ethan will take 8. The turn will then be passed and Parhelion is bounced back to hand. On his turn, Ethan will pay for Smothering Tithe, and then plays a Prismatic Vista before passing the turn. Now on his turn, Shelby will play a Nykthos, which triggers Yoshimaru. He'll then cast a Kodama of the West Tree, which does give Yoshimaru another +1/+1 counter. He'll then move to combat and swing for 4 with Yoshimaru at Matt, who does not block and takes the 4 commander. Kodama will trigger upon this damage, and Shelby finds a tapped forest to the battlefield. After this, the turn will be passed to Matt, who does not pay for Smothering Tithe on his turn. He will play a Scrublands though, and then goes to equip Sword of Feast and Famine to Isshin. Nobody has any responses, so he'll then move to combat and swing for 5 at Shelby, who cannot block it. With the sword trigger on the stack, Matt will hold priority and float 3 mana. taking a damage to City of Brass. He'll then channel the new legendary land Takenuma to mill 3 cards, and then return a creature card from his graveyard to his hand. He mills Demonic Tutor, Karazakar, and Search the Premises, and he'll return Karazakar to his hand. Matt will then untap his land, and Shelby discards a Temple of Plenty. Now in his second main phase, Matt decides to just jam out the Karazakar, taking another damage to the City of Brass. The turn will then be passed to Cody, and he starts his turn off by paying for Smothering Tithe. He'll then cast a Talisman of Hierarchy, and then activates Key to the City, discarding Parhelion again to give his commander unblockable. He'll then move to combat and repeat the same process as last time, returning Parhelion and then crewing with his commander before attacks are declared. He'll then declare one of his original angels at each Ethan and Shelby, and then Parhelion at Matt. Upon attacking 2 of Matt's opponents, he and Cody will both draw 2 and lose 2 life, and Isshin will double it, so they'll draw 4 and lose 4. And neither of them pay for any Smothering Tithe triggers, so Shelby will make 8 treasures. Parhelion also makes 2 attacking angels, so he'll have 1 go at Ethan and 1 go at Matt. In total, Ethan takes 8 damage, Shelby takes 4, and Matt will take 9. Cody will then play a command tower, and then go to his end step, bouncing Parhelion. On his turn, Ethan won't pay for Smothering Tithe, then plays a Spectator Seating and fetches for an island with his Vista. He'll then cast his own Smothering Tithe, and then pass the turn to Shelby. And Shelby will not pay for Ethan's Smothering Tithe. He will, however, play Nagenjo's Seed of the Empire and put a counter on Yoshimaru. He'll then sacrifice 6 of his treasures to cast his other commander, Kodama of the East Tree. This will put another counter on Yoshimaru. He'll then cast a casual 2-mana Galta, and when it enters the battlefield, Kodama will trigger, so Shelby puts in Gisela the Broken Blade. This will get Yoshimaru 2 more counters. He'll then move to combat and swing for 8 with Yoshimaru at Ethan. Karazakar will trigger, and Shelby and Matt will both draw 2 and lose 2. Matt can't pay for the Smothering Tithe, and Shelby decides not to, so Ethan will make 4 treasures. Shelby also unfortunately forgets his Kodama trigger and does not get a land off of it, but after combat he will cast a 3 visits, finding a Canopy Vista. Kodama will also trigger, and he puts a Miko Koro Center of the Sea onto the battlefield, triggering Yoshimaru again. The turn is then passed to Matt, who doesn't pay for either Smothering Tithe, and then plays his own Nagenjo City of the Empire. He'll then curse Shelby with a Curse of Disturbance. He'll then move to combat and try to decide who he wants to swing Isshin at. He doesn't want to hit Ethan because he's already really low and hasn't really done much this game. Shelby threatens interaction with a lot of open mana, plus he doesn't want him to block with Gisela and gain more life, and Cody just has a bunch of 4/4s that can block. Cody does, however, see this as an opportunity that he wants to take. He offers to let Matt through, but with the addition that Matt owes him one in the future. Matt agrees and swings Isshin at Cody. When he attacks, he'll goad one of his 4/4 angels. Cody will take 5, and in response to the Sword of Feast and Famine trigger, Matt will cast a Valakut Awakening, and he takes 1 to City of Brass. Shelby will respond by activating his own Miko Koro, making everyone draw a card. Nobody will pay for Smothering Tithe, so each Shelby and Ethan will both make 3 more treasures. Valakut Awakening will then resolve, and Matt puts 4 cards to the bottom and draws 5. And he cannot pay for the 10 Smothering Tithe triggers, so Ethan and Shelby will both make 5 more treasures. The Feast and Famine trigger will finally resolve. Unfortunately, because of all the drawing and the treasure making, the table forgets that Cody also needs to discard a card. But to be fair, he probably would have just discarded Parhelion again, which he's just going to discard with Key to the City anyway next turn. Now in Matt's second main, he'll tap for 4 and cast a Disrupt Decorum. After this, Matt passes the turn, discarding Aurelia, a land, and an Ulamog, and the Ulamog makes him shuffle his graveyard back into his library. Now in his turn, Cody will pay for Ethan's Smothering Tithe, but not for Shelby's. Now in his main phase, he'll play Swamp his land for turn. He'll then activate Key to the City to give his 2/2 Death Touch unblockable, and discards Parhelion. He'll then return the Parhelion to the battlefield at the beginning of combat and crew it with his commander before attacks. Ethan's Danger Sense activates, and he holds priority in response to the crew ability. He then asks Cody how he plans to attack. Cody says that Shelby is the scariest board present, but he can't comfortably swing it to that board. All his creatures are goaded and can't swing at Matt, so he's probably going to hit Ethan. After hearing this, Ethan tells Cody that he can ensure that all of his attackers will safely get through to Shelby, but he needs Cody to promise that he's going to full swing all of his big creatures at Shelby, or Ethan won't let him swing at all. Cody has a pretty decent idea of what Ethan's planning, so he agrees under the condition that he gets to swing the 2/2 at Ethan so he'll get the Karazakar triggers. And Ethan agrees. So Ethan will cast Icy Blast X is equal to 3 to tap down both Kodamas and Gisela. Cody then declares Violent Tumor at Ethan, Parhelion at Shelby, and all 6 angels at Shelby. Unfortunately, Shelby will die from these attacks, and he has no responses. Upon attacking, Cody and Matt will both make 2/2 zombies, and draw 4, lose 4. And neither of them pay for Smothering Tithe, so Ethan's Icy Blast was mana neutral. Post-combat, Cody casts an Unmarked Grave to put a Metalwork Colossus into his graveyard. After that, Cody drops a Cataclysmic Gearhulk. Ethan will respond by casting Repeal X is equal to 8, targeting Parhelion. The Gearhulk's ability will resolve, so Ethan keeps a treasure, Smothering Tithe, and his Riddlesmith. Cody will keep Key to the City and his commander. Matt will also keep his commander and Sword of Feast and Famine. After all this, the turn will be passed to Ethan, and Cody has to discard Parhelion and Dermataxi during his cleanup. Now on Ethan's turn, he'll immediately move to combat and swing for 2 at Cody. After this, he'll cast a Lotus Petal and loot with Riddlesmith. He'll then repeat this process with a Jeweled Lotus, and then he'll cast his commander by sacrificing the Jeweled Lotus and tapping for 2 more. Ethan will then cast a 1-mana Paradoxical Outcome, bouncing Riddlesmith, Smothering Tithe, and Lotus Petal back to his hand. Sensing that this could potentially let Ethan combo off, Matt decides to Deflecting Swat it. He ultimately decides to change the target of Lotus Petal to Hinata, so Ethan will still pick up Riddlesmith, Smothering Tithe, and Hinata and draw 3 cards. After this, he'll play a Sulphur Falls as land for turn, and then tap for 1 to cast a Ponder. After looking at the top 3, he decides to shuffle and draw a card. He'll then recast his Riddlesmith, and then pass the turn to Matt. Matt immediately drops a Bajuka Bog and nukes Cody's graveyard. Matt will then tap for 5 and cast his Goldspan Dragon he's been waiting to cast since the beginning of the game. He'll then move to combat. He'll declare Isshin at Cody and Goldspan Dragon at Ethan. Thanks to Isshin, Goldspan Dragon's attack trigger makes 2 treasure tokens. Upon damage, Cody has to discard Weatherlight, and Matt untaps all his lands. Now in a second main, Matt will sacrifice both of his treasures for 4 mana, and then tap for 7 more to cast a Torment of Hailfire, X is equal to 9. And he also takes a damage to City of Brass. Ethan discards a full grip and has to lose 6 life. Cody discards 5 and loses 12. And yes, that is a Phage the Untouchable Cody discarded. And after a pretty impactful turn, Matt passes, and he has to discard a swamp on his cleanup. During Cody's untap, he decides to pay 2 to draw a card with Key to the City. He'll then play an Arid Mesa and then cast a Leaden Mare. After this, he'll crack his Arid Mesa for a basic Plains. And then he moves to combat and returns the Weatherlight to the battlefield with Greasefang's ability. He'll crew it with Greasefang and then swing it at Matt. Matt'll take the 4, and Cody gets to look at the top 5 cards of his library and put 1 into his hand. Out of those 5, he reveals a Solemn Simulacrum. Now in a second main, Cody sees that Matt still has a full grip, so he casts a Dark Deal. Matt discards his whole hand, and his only non-mana card is a Delina Wild Mage. Matt will draw 6, and Cody and Ethan unfortunately don't get to draw off this. With nothing left to do, Cody will pass the turn. Ethan will start off with a Mox Opal, and declines the Riddlesmith trigger seeing as he's empty-handed. With no other real choice, Ethan taps for 6 mana and casts his commander. The turn is then passed to Matt again, and Matt starts off with a Plateau. Then taps for 6 mana and drops Aurelia the War Leader. This is quite literally game over, but Matt still goes to combat, swings his flyers at Ethan and Isshin at Cody. When he gets his Goldspan mana, he Chaos Warps Ethan's commander away. Ethan could potentially flip into something good, so Matt gives him a good cut after Ethan shuffles, and all of Smooth Brain wishes Ethan good luck. Unfortunately, it is just a Marsh Flats. With an extra combat step on the way, Cody will concede the game, making Matt our Kamigawa Neon Dynasty winner this week. Congrats, man! Well everyone, there you have it. What an explosive game. We got to see a pretty good show from all the decks today. I personally really enjoyed seeing Yoshimaru Legendary Tribal amass a massive board state. What did you guys think? Leave us a comment down below. We love hearing feedback from you guys. And while you're down there, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. You can check out the deck list there too, and follow us on our social media page. We had an absolute blast recording these Kamigawa games, and you can look forward to another set of 4 commanders next week. Well, we're at the end of the video now. Thanks as always for watching, you guys, and have a smooth day.